Check. 1, 2. Do. Hey guys, it's Mike at westendmotorsports.com here with another episode of our weekly podcast, the Mikey Motorcycle Podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. This time, what we are going to do, we've got some news reports. So it's a little bit of an inside industry podcast, and I'm going to give you my take on some information that we've gotten from both Harley Davidson and Polaris / Indian on their Q1 2024 numbers and sort of go over that stuff and what it means for the industry as a whole, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a dealer, whether you're an aftermarket parts retailer like us or an independent shop or whatever it might be. And just kind of go through this stuff little by little. This industry is, at least for me, very hard to get information on. Now, Polaris and Harley are public companies, so they do have to post their earnings and stuff. But outside of that, like there just isn't a lot of readily available sources of information. I do get AMD Magazine monthly, which is I think one of the best for not only their editorials but just for actually giving you information that you can digest. So that's a really good source, but that's like one good source. We've got some others that are okay, but I find that for our specific segment of the power sports industry, which is largely V-twin, there's just not a lot out there, and so just even trying to look up information on 2024 Q1 numbers, I find so many websites with just like where their last post was from 2023 or the end of last year or maybe the beginning of this year, and it's just like there's just not a lot of news and support about our segment specifically, and we are not specifically concerned, or we're not specifically concerned, but I'm not really concerned with what's going on in the side-by-side market or the ATV market or the dirt bike market. That's just not what we do here. And so, looking at that stuff is just not important. And so getting somebody or a source that just focuses on the V-twin is really, it's pretty tricky. So, I'm trying to make this a podcast that a lot of people can use within the industry. Like I said, whether you're just a regular retail consumer or if you're a guy who owns a shop or whatever, because it's hard to get this stuff. And so I'm trying to sort of dial it in for you here and put it in a digestible, besides having to look at me, but you could just listen to it if you want to. So, but put it into a digestible, quick little informational podcast on occasion. We're not going to do this all the time, but when news comes out, I think it could be handy. It could be useful for some people to get this information sort of given to them in a way that they can understand. So I'm going to start with Polaris because there's just not as much information from Polaris. Their earnings reports are sort of muddled because Polaris is a huge company with lots of segments. So like their stuff on Indian specifically is sort of like it's more of a footnote in their earnings report rather than like the main focus of their earnings report, where when Harley gives you their earnings report, it's about basically everything we care about except for Livewire. And so, which we will get to, that's a big part of this one, that just came out. But, so, with Indian being a footnote in Polaris, it actually looks like for Polaris, if you're an Indian dealer or somebody who supports Indian motorcycles in a way, or a consumer, it looks like Indian is the only sort of positive segment that I could take, from their report. Polaris, Q1 2024 compared to Q1 2023 is down 20%, which is massive for a company of their size. Largely, that's based on just not selling new models, from what I can see. Based on what their earnings report said, the Indian line specifically was up, and they tell you it's in the low teens, which to me means it's exactly 11%, and they don't want to say that. It makes it, church it up a little bit, make it sound like it's, maybe 13 or 14% when it's really 11 and not 10, So um, that's my take on it. They don't tell you specifically. They also don't tell you why Indian is up 11%. They don't tell us if it's has anything to do with the new Scout models that they have, the 2024 Scout models. I've not gotten a lot of people asking for fitment on the 2024 Scout models, so I don't know if that's it or not. I don't know if the Chief models or it's the Chieftain and Pursuit and Bagger models that are carrying them. I would imagine, because we see this holds true with Harley as well, that the bigger revenue bikes, so the more expensive bikes, are probably what's forcing them up. So even if they're not up in actual model sales, they could be up in revenue because the bikes have gotten more expensive, or they're selling more expensive bikes, right? So again, it's sort of a difficult earnings report for a dummy like me to read, but they just don't seem to be that specific. And maybe there's a source where there are more specifics that I don't have access to. And if someone out there does, by all means, please send it to me. I'd be happy to look at that. So, it looks like maybe that's good for the Indian line. Maybe that's good, for the aftermarket support of the Indian line. I think that they seem to have a good product, but in the new Scouts and stuff, and their bagger line's pretty well tested at this point, and that's good as well. So based on my feedback, what I'm hearing from customers just on fitment requests, because that's always a big thing, right? Whenever there's new model years on the market, everybody's always checking because our industry is so slow to update and to get caught up, so everybody's always checking, does this fit a 24? And I've had quite a few for the bagger models. That's pretty regular. It's an everyday occurrence. But the new Scout stuff, I really haven't had a lot of demand. That's through our emails, phone calls, and whatever. So we'll see. I like to think that the Scout will sort of buoy them up a little bit, because I think what they did there makes sense. Definitely long term, it makes sense. But maybe it'll take a little while for that to pick up and for that to be seen on the wider market. We'll find out. Scooting over to HD's earning reports. So I sort of broke it down in the good and the bad here on my notes that I'm working off of. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good for Harley Davidson. So, the thing that they'll highlight on their earnings report, as a top line note, is that retail revenue was up 6%, which sounds good. You say, all right, the economy is kind of weird. If you're up 6%, that's a pretty good deal, right? But unfortunately, when you start to look into the underlying numbers, that 6% doesn't seem so hot as far as I'm concerned. And I am not a Harley Davidson shareholder, and I'm not advising anyone to be or not to be. But if I was looking at this, I would be fairly concerned if I was actually a shareholder myself, or I do consider myself a stakeholder, because when the company does well, we do well, reasonably. So on that front, I always want to see Harley succeed and to do well and to sell more motorcycles and for more butts and seats, but that doesn't necessarily look like it's the case. So in breaking down that number, so retail sales are up 6%. The reason that they're up 6% is almost entirely based on bagger sales. And probably, I would guess, although they don't tell this is my opinion, a lot of that has to do with probably CVO sales. That seems to be hot. And so when we look at how many more models they actually sold, Q1 24 to Q1 23, it's 1,500 bikes. Okay, so this is North America. All right, so with a population of 400 million people, obviously not all of those buying motorcycles, they've increased sales quarter over quarter 1,500. So that's 500 more bikes a month were sold, and so that doesn't seem very good as far as I can tell. You divvy that out between all of the Harley dealers across North America, which I should probably look up and see how many there are currently, although it's constantly in flux. But for each of them for there to be 1,500 more bikes sold in 3 months, I mean, that's what, two or three more bikes a month, maybe per dealer, maybe. I don't know. It's, you start dividing it up. That doesn't seem good to me, as far as I could tell. So, it's up, so they want to highlight that, but it's like, man, not great as far as that goes. On top of that, even though they've sold 1,500 more bikes and that drove the revenue up because they're probably more expensive bikes, profit, their margin is down and expenses are up. So their whole plan for these last couple of years was to make less bikes and drive the price up, which means that you're selling less bikes, but you're making more money if you're the dealer and the company. Okay. And it appears as if the exact opposite is happening. So they are selling marginally, I mean, an absolute margin more bikes, and profit, and their profit margin is down and their expenses are up, which is, going to drive your profit margin down naturally. So that means that they're actually making less money per bike and making less bikes, which is definitely not the direction that the motor company wants to be going in, based on their plans. At least it doesn't really stick to their plan. That's the North American market. The international market it was way down across the board. Basically every international market was down quite a bit. And this is compared to 23, which, if you read any of their own press conferences and stuff, or press releases rather, 23 was considered to be a bad year. So like, we're comparing these numbers to a bad year. And that's not good. So when the numbers are worse than the bad year was, I think that generally that's not really good. It's hard to tell. Q1 is a funny time of year for the industry as a whole. I mean, I think that there have been years where you could basically throw Q1 away, depending on weather, depending on location, the weather in certain locations. If you have an early spring, it's certainly possible that you see just things open up and people go out and buy bikes. This year, according to everybody that I talked to, doesn't really seem like it was an awful, long-lasting winter that dragged on in the most populous parts of the country. So, I don't see that being a big factor where Q2 all of a sudden it's spring into summer and you see that really turning around. Q2 is definitely our busiest time of the year. And so, because you're just solidly in warmer months, right? So April, May, June, those are all, either one of those months could be our best month in an entire year. And it usually is one of those months. So like, Q2 is really going to be a bellwether for them for the year, and always is. That's not new. But the Q1 numbers being what they are fairly disappointing, especially compared to 23, which was also fairly disappointing for the motor company. And then one other big thing here that they announced as if it was a good thing, but then when I read the numbers, my take is not. I'm personally not only not impressed, I think they've got a serious, if it were me and it were my company, I would look at this as a serious problem. Now, I know that there's politics involved with this, but when we talk about the live wire model, which is something that Harley has just been pot committed to since they came out with it, and they don't really seem to care that this thing has been a major loser since they invented it, or released it, I guess I should say. The live wire revenue itself, so just from the live wire segment of Harley Davidson, which includes more than just live wire motorcycles, okay, which we're going to talk about in a second. Live wire revenue in Q1 24 over Q1 23 was down 39%. And that 39% was almost entirely based on the fact that they're not selling balance bikes. So I don't know if Harley had acquired or was distributing these balance bikes, but like, that was 40% of the live wire sales last year, and live wire revenue last year, live wire profit last year was a loss to the tune of $115 million to $125 million for 2023. Okay, so now Harley's removed that balance bike portion of it, which was apparently 39% of their overall sales, which is insane. And apparently they were losing money on it, because now this year they're forecasted to only lose 105 to 115 million on the live wire line. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the point of doing this, right? Like, if you're looking at this and you're just a company, just any company, and you say, okay, I've got, we're making, I don't know what Harley makes in a year, but 105 to 150 million dollar loss is significant to a company at Harley Davidson size. Okay, why are you committing to something that loses that much money every year? It's not like this is a once profitable lineup for them, right? Or a once profitable segment for them. And so I think it really comes down to politics. Either that, or it just comes down to sometimes these CEOs get committed to stuff. But we saw this push when they first came out with these bikes. Polaris came out with one. A lot of manufacturers came out with electric models of bikes where there was zero demand. And in the beginning, a lot of that was to push down their carbon footprint, so they could say that, hey, we're manufacturing this electric bike, and even though we're not selling any of them, right? And nobody wants them, we're making them. And by making these electric bikes, it offsets our carbon footprint for all of the gas models that we sell. And so they would make a percentage of their new models electric bikes, again, even though nobody wants them, right? And like, the whole thing about that is you're manufacturing something, so you're taking resources out of the planet to make something that nobody wants, to prove to the world that you're doing less damage to the earth. And it's just like, well, I don't know, and I'm not that smart. I certainly don't have the education that these guys have, but that seems like it makes zero sense to me, in every way. One, you're losing money, so it's not like you can bandy that out and say, oh, we're doing this green thing and it drives sales across the board, right? Nobody wants the thing. And two, you're not actually helping anything by wastefully creating new motorcycles and using resources to do that, right? I'd rather see you just make the motorcycles that you actually sell and make money on, and just make what you can sell for that year, and don't pull anything else. Don't use any resources that you don't need to. Like, it is literally wasteful. There's no net benefit to their bottom line. There's no real net benefit to the planet, that's for sure. And I'm no hippie, but it's like, it's just piggish, really, at the end of the day, when you really look at it. And so it's like, if you actually want to do something, you can do something, and it's, don't make thousands of new motorcycles with lithium batteries or whatever else it might be that nobody wants. And the net benefit would be better than making the motorcycles, even though they're non-combustion engines. So, this is one of the great hypocrisies that we see all the time with the green stuff. And you see it in the automotive industry as well. But, it's just something that I think needs pointed out. It's not like I don't want to live in a place that's got clean water and clean air and all that stuff. And I'd like to see us, conserve resources and not be pigs, though, too. So, I'm not trying to get on my high horse here, certainly, but it's just one of those deals where it's really just a big marketing thing, and it's kind of a scam, just like a lot of it. And so, I feel the need to sort of point it out. And I just don't understand. There's no reason for a company of Harley's size to lose that much money every year, unless there's something else behind it, right? So maybe they think that in 10 years, that's going to be their platform, and so they've got to eat it. That might be a reasonable sort of business take on it. Maybe there's that long play and they don't want to broadcast that. We don't know. So it certainly is possible. I don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Again, these guys make a lot more money than I do. So I guess that's proof of something. We'll see. So on that point, there's a lot of excuses coming from Harley, coming from the industry in itself. Everybody likes to point out this global turmoil that we've seen. It's an election year. That sucks. There's wars in Ukraine. There's Israel, Hamas stuff going on, and there is a a general just feeling of things being upside down. And so people want to point to that and say, well, people aren't buying motorcycles. And I don't buy that for 1 second, because all you need to do is go back to 2020 and 2021 and you could point to those same exact things. And I think they were probably tenfold what they are today, at least in the lives of average, ordinary Americans. And that didn't stop a single person from buying a motorcycle, right? In fact, it actually helps sell motorcycles, because motorcycles are, for so many people, their release and their way to sort of get out of the turmoil and get out of the nonsense, at least for a period of time, right? It's, riding a motorcycle is just one of those things that's therapeutic. You can't really think about a whole lot of other things while you're riding a motorcycle, because you've got to be paying attention, right? So it's just, it's a cathartic type of thing. And generally when there's turmoil and a bunch of nonsense going on, that's not bad for the motorcycle industry. So if you go back a couple of years where things were way scarier and they were way more closer to home, people bought motorcycles. So I don't buy that for 1 second. Now you've got people talking about the economy. You've got almost as many people saying the economy sucks as people saying the economy is good. And, honestly, my take is it's been that way for 30 years. We have multiple, and maybe forever, we have multiple economies within our economy, right? And you've got the money men, and they've got their real people. All right, sorry about that. I lost my microphone for a second, so I apologize if there's any sort of technical issues there. But what I was talking about was, the sort of economy that revolves around money. The Wall Street stuff, the stuff that is really affected by the banks and all that kind of big money stuff. And then you've got sort of the real economy that the rest of us are sort of dealing with. And when you look at the prices of things, like the things that everybody has to buy, we all know that everything's more expensive. But, we're starting to see demand slow down for things that people don't need, which we are certainly in the want business and not in a need business. And so, we've got increasing interest rates, which in an economy which is based almost entirely on debt, right? That's not generally a good thing for sales of new units. So, you could get a brand new bike, and a lot of people are purchasing these things based on their payment, regardless of the price that they're paying. And so when that payment changes, these things become unaffordable. And if you don't need to have a motorcycle, well, and you don't have the funds to make that payment, you're just not going to do it. So you're going to see sales get affected, right? And then not just that, but I think also something that nobody talks about, and this is going to be true for motorcycles, RVs, all of these sort of discretionary income, big ticket items that we saw go through the roof in COVID. A lot of people that wanted those items, but either couldn't use them or couldn't buy them, bought them in the last couple of years, way more, right? It exploded so big to the point, it wasn't slow and steady growth. It was explosive growth. And it's like, there's only so many people that want to buy a Harley in a given year. And there's always a group of people that want to buy a Harley and can't, right? For a variety of reasons, whether it's money, time, whatever. And so COVID sort of took away the sort of the governors on that, where people had time, people had extra money, maybe they refinanced their house, interest was cheap, whatever. And so those factors are gone. So as far as I'm concerned, I genuinely think that stuff is a way bigger factor than the turmoil and election year nonsense, because we did pretty well in 2020, and that was about as chaotic and psychotic of a year as you could possibly have, right? So I know a lot of people didn't, but our industry as a whole, for the most part, went through the roof with that, and so did every, like I said, discretionary, the RV business, the boat business. It was insane. So and you guys know that, everybody knows that, right? So the thing is, what can Harley do if this is going to be the market going forward? It doesn't seem like interest rates are going to be dropping anytime soon. Matter of fact, they might be going up. And Harley, as far as I'm concerned, if I was anybody that anybody high up at Harley listens to, I would be telling them the exact same thing that I've been saying for, I don't know, maybe a decade, maybe longer. If Harley wants to sell a bunch of units for decently priced motorcycles that are maybe not their high ticket items. I'm not telling you to stop making your high ticket. I'm not saying don't make a CVO touring model, but what you should also be doing is making an entry level motorcycle that is not a Street 500 or a Street 750 or even a Sportster. No offense to people who own those motorcycles, but like those things don't move the needle. When we look at metric bike sales, when you had the metric bike boom for V twins within the last 20 years, this happened, right? They sold a pile of bikes because people wanted Harleys and couldn't afford them, right? And at the time, Harley was selling tons of bikes too, so they didn't care, which is what happens all the time with Harley Davidson, right? They've got their piece of the pie and they don't really care to compete often. And when they decide to compete, they compete, in my opinion, in the absolute wrong way, right? Like they try to make an adventure bike. No offense to Pan Am guys. They make the V-Rod trying to compete with Honda bikes. No offense. But like those things don't move the needle. What moves the needle for Harley Davidson is baggers. It was Softails and it switched to baggers, right? But it's like, it's the bike that people want to ride on the weekend. It's the hot bike that could be customized. That is, I don't want to say prestigious because it's prestige is a part of it, but it's like the cool bike. You know what I mean? And so the bagger has been the bike of choice, the biggest segment for Harley for a long time. But you know, baggers exclude a huge group of people. They're big, they're heavy, they're wide, they're difficult for any guy who's shorter. Look, I'm 5'7", but this isn't just about me. I have a Street Glide. I can ride it if I want to. I don't, you know, like that's not the problem. The thing is, it's a price point thing, you know? And so if Harley was, if anybody at Harley was listening to me, I would tell them to make a Softail or a smaller bike with a Milwaukee 8 or whatever, or maybe one of their different motors that looks like a Harley, sounds like a Harley, and has a low seat height, is fairly affordable. You know, we're talking, I don't know if they could do it now because things have gotten so expensive, but we're starting to see prices come back down with the economy contracting. But you know, a $10,000 to $12,000 bike that's got very little on it. Okay, we don't need ride control. We don't need all this stuff. You know, a minimal bike that somebody who's getting back into riding motorcycles, or a woman who wants to ride motorcycles, or somebody who's just a little bit cautious can sit on it, handle it easily, feel comfortable, and not have to make a $30,000 to $40,000 commitment on a bike. Okay. And then the second thing is make that bike. They've got this Softail platform with an M8, which they should be using to their advantage. Okay. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just tune the motor up a little bit. Take one of those Softail platforms and make a miniature Street Glide, because that's the bike that people want, or a miniature Road Glide, which the Lowrider ST is cool, but it's not exactly what we're talking about here. It's close. I think they did a good job, but a miniature Street Glide with a fairing that does not come with radio, dash stuff, gauges, all that stuff is not in the fairing. So it's inexpensive, but you make the fairing with modular cutouts and punch outs so that if somebody wants to add a fairing, the aftermarket and Harley Davidson themselves can add that upgrade kit on, right? Not only that, but make it look like a little Street Glide and put dual exhaust on the thing. And maybe you can make it so that you could put 95 to 16 fitment slip-ons on there. Maybe you can't. Maybe we need a whole lineup of slip-ons. That's fine by me. But then also make it so that Harley has a factory add-on removable hard bag and the infrastructure is on the bike to begin with, right? So I don't care what you call it. This is kind of what the Sport Glide was supposed to be when they came out with it. Like their write-ups on it were that it would be like that, but that's not what a Sport Glide is. Not a mini street glide. That fairing is a glorified windshield. Okay, that's not an actual fairing where somebody could add a radio into it. So it's like, do that, and do that at a price point where people can get into the bike for $15,000 or $16,000, and it's got a low seat height. People can reach the ground no matter what. You know, you can make a comfortable bike like that without any issues. Use the Heritage, take the leather bags off, take the windshield off, you know, and do that. And like, there should be no, that bike would sell through the roof. There are so many people that get older that don't want a heavy bagger, that go back to a lot of metric bikes. There's people that, and then you've got the entry level. So this is really kind of like a bookend bike, right? Are you going to buy it if you're in your 50s, you own your own business, and you make a lot of money and you want a showpiece? No, you're not. You're still going to buy the CVO. That's okay. We're not treading on the CVO, and they're not taking out from any of their other successes. This is like literally just doing what they do and extending it out to a broader audience with the platform that they already have. So you don't need to design a live wire. You don't need to design the rocker or the rocker 2. You don't need to design the V-Rod. We're not talking about, you know, something that requires a whole lot of R&D. You ought to be able to figure this out pretty easily. So, you know, if Harley wants to do something in this economy that is coming up and is probably here to stay for a little while, because, you know, just even if we're just looking at interest rates, like that is a competitive move that takes their competitors out at the kneecaps in a lot of ways. And so I think that if the metric companies are smart, they would come out with a bike that's affordable again, that people want. They just got way too expensive. And, you know, if you're going to spend $16,000 on a Yamaha, you might as well spend $16,000 on a Harley, right? So, you know, the Japanese companies have lost their way there as well. And I know things come down to dollars and cents. So, you know, maybe their hands are tied to a point. But if there was a way that Harley could do that and make it profitable, I guarantee you people would be in the dealers and they'd be buying them. And then you know what they would do after those bikes is they would upgrade to the next size up. And so that's the thing, is getting people on the bikes and not missing out on that entire entry level field, which they've always done, because the Sportster was a poor entry level bike. They rode like hell. They sat real high. They were narrow. They didn't handle good. It's like, don't do those things. Make a nice riding, low center of gravity, solid, easy handling bike that somebody could do something with, and get them on it and do it for cheap. And if Harley does that, or something like that, there's no doubt in my mind that they could sort of tread water through this market as we go forward. So so that's it for that. We don't have any kind of aftermarket news. There's new parts coming out. If you've got a 24 touring model, look out, man. Some stuff fits, some stuff doesn't. It's crazy right now. So I strongly recommend checking on almost everything, unless it lists your bike specifically. Like the seats that we have on our website, they say 24 specific models. It all depends. Half the models have new stuff, some new stuff, and half the models have the same stuff. And so depending on your exact model and the exact part that you're looking at, it may or may not fit. So it's a mess right now, and the aftermarket's trying to catch up. But, you know, like I said earlier, we're pretty slow to do that. So that's it for this one. I apologize for the long-winded answer, but there's a lot of details to go over here. I hope you appreciate that. We do have some, I know I've been saying it for a while, but we do have some interviews coming down the line here. And so I hope you stay tuned. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and subscribe and all that nonsense. And thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.